You're listening to the League Bound Podcast.
Sheldon's coming again. Oh, mercy.
Your source for weekly coverage on the future stars of the NBA.
Gives it to Jenkins for the championship.
I'm your co-host, Jake Schrantz.
And I'm your co-host, Branden Blue.
With production for the podcast coming from Broderick Wilken.
With the first pick in the NBA draft.
Welcome to the League Bound Podcast, where we break down the best draft prospects and some of the rising stars of the NBA. Today we are here for episode 19. I'm your co-host, Branden, and I'm here with Jake and Brody. How are you guys today?
I'm doing really good. We're getting a little bit of an early morning recording going on here on Sunday. And Brody, we have got a jam-packed episode to bring everyone.
Yes, one last podcast in this studio, probably until all the way to late January. I think we're going to plan some online recordings while we are on Christmas break, as we will not be here for the studio. We'll be home with our families. And that being said, I think we got some great topics, some great things to talk about, and we got some interesting things for the negativity section to kick off the pod. How about that, Branden? If you want to break down negativity.
Negativity!
Well, first up, we're going into our negativity segment where we break down fights, scuffles, disagreements, you name it. Bad sportsmanship all across the league or even college basketball. And we've had some wacky happenings this week. First, we have Jordan Clarkson squaring up in a game against the Jazz, and boxing legend Manny Pacquiao came out and said, that man has potential. So Jordan Clarkson, when he retires, we could see him in the ring. And then we have Jordan McLaughlin, who got kicked in the face on accident by Isaiah Jackson on a pump fake three. But me personally, if that happened, I wouldn't really take that. But
Bro, his jaw on the slow motion replay, it was insane. It was like he got hit by Tyson right on the right side. That was wild.
His jaw was like, I can't even.
Are we talking about the kick?
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
Isaiah Jackson was out of control, and he just tried to catch it on the backside of it, and
It was just
caught him with a heel kick. That was crazy.
Unlucky. Catching strays out here, man.
But probably my favorite and the most talked about negativity of the week, we have, Brody, just break it down.
All right, here, I just pulled up the video, and we got the classic. Zion Williamson, I think everyone can agree, is back. Back, and I would say better than ever, in the best shape of his life, playing probably the best basketball in his life. This man's going crazy. And to wrap up it wasn't a whopping of the Suns, or was it a whopping? I didn't see the score.
It wasn't a it was close.
But a close win against the Suns. To wrap it up, he did this.
Look at this.
Touchdown from Larry Nance.
Game's over. Oh! Oh! Look at
Nasty
that.
with
And look
it.
how he's hyping up the crowd after that.
Oh, my God.
That's crazy.
But look at this. Campaign says a little something, but he's walking away, so it's like, it's whatever.
And so this brought on a scuffle here. And the Suns were not happy about this, which I guess, but I don't know.
Notice how nobody's talking to Zion, though.
I don't know if you guys saw this, but one of the funniest things during this whole scuffle was, I believe, the Pelicans mascot.
I did see that.
He was like comforting Jose Alvarado or something. That was,
It might show up on here.
I don't know if I've ever seen anything like that.
Look, yeah,
Look at him
right
on the
there.
bottom of the screen. He's like, come on, man, don't worry about it.
Every other negativity.
Who was
section
number
for-
11 out there? Landale.
Jock Landale,
Why are you out there, bro?
Oh, my gosh.
Would you guys consider Jose Alvarado a Hall of Fame instigator, even though he didn't necessarily start
I think
this?
he's getting there. We haven't seen enough of him, but I think he's... Look at Zion mean mugging. I love this.
I mean,
We
he's
need
building a
more of this.
reputation.
We need more of this in the league. We need actual rivalries.
And this could be a serious playoff matchup too, because I think right now these two teams are 1 and 2 in the Western Conference. So this could even be a potential conference finals matchup based on where we're at today.
Yeah, and people might not necessarily agree with the poor sportsmanship here, but personally, I feel like something the league's been lacking for quite a while. Thank you, Stephen A. something I feel like the league's been lacking for a while is true rivalries and true hatred towards other teams. And stuff like this is an easy way to kick it off. I mean, a Zion windmill 360 dunk straight out of Duke University. I mean, that's the best way to start it. I mean, how about you guys?
I definitely think that, we do need to see a little bit more animosity. We've had the Warriors-Cavs rivalry, but there wasn't any real...
Yeah, there was... I would say that's the most relevant rivalry of the past, 6 or 7 years, but there was no, fights or kind of stuff like this breaking out in any of those games.
Yeah. And, even, I think back to, the Lakers-Celtics in, the late 2000s, 2010s. And even then, it was just...
Look at that shot of Jose.
We'll leave that up.
Oh, my gosh.
But, having a rivalry like this can be really beneficial, I think, just for the league and its how well it does.
I would also like to bring up, I don't know if you guys saw it, but in Zion's press conference right after this game, he was talking about basically the reason he did it. And a lot of that context behind there goes back to their playoff game and him not having played in the playoff game from last year. I mean, I think there was quite a lot of noise in the off seasons about Zion's work ethic when he gained a bunch of weight, but it's a foot injury. How are you going to maintain it? But I mean, best shape of his life, absolute dominant game, destroys the Suns who booted them out of the playoffs, and caps it off with a 360 dunk to tell the world he is back.
One thing to point out, it might not be as good as this matchup was, but they actually play again today at 2:30 Central Time. So there might be a little popcorn when I'm watching that. But moving on, I'm going to get into something that I really want to ask you guys. Speaking off of Zion, he's been having a great season. I think right now he's one of the leading scorers and points in the paint, and he's still he's one of the youngest stars in the league. Then you have guys like Ja last year, he was in serious contention for the MVP race. And that's not even talking about Luka and Jason Tatum, who we all know how crazy they are. And all of those guys are under 25. And then you have a rookie like Paolo who's looking like he's going to be a problem for a while. So I just want to ask y'all, do y'all think the NBA players are getting better? Or is the league just getting easier to dominate offensively?
Well, I mean, you look at some of the top stars in the league, and a lot of it does have to do with promotion. A lot of these guys like Ja and Zion. I mean, Zion was on the cover of 2K after his rookie season. So the league is definitely pushing a lot of these guys, but I think they're doing it because they deserve it. I mean, Luka is pushing Giannis for the best player in the league. Jason Tatum is having an MVP season, and you add in Ja and Zion, both from the same draft class. They're even younger than both of those guys. So it's kind of hard to argue that this is still that grown man's league like they always like to talk about.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, not even looking at some of the big superstars, but you just look at guys like Evan Mobley from last year, even Scotty Barnes, who have come in on real contending teams and have made an immediate impact. And those two guys definitely have the potential to be big stars in the league one day. But even just coming in and making that jump as role players, and I think we've seen a lot of other young players do that. And I feel even in these last few years, there have been a lot more guys who have booms than there have been major busts. I know right now James Wiseman is a person a lot of people are talking about, but I'm really trying to think hard, and I feel there just hasn't been a lot of guys who's oh yeah, they really flopped.
I mean, you look ever since really the 2015 draft class, there have been guys in that top 10 that have, just completely changed the way the league looks. I mean, you have Karl Anthony Towns starting off in 2015. He has been All-NBA and an All-Star basically almost every year. You have Jaylen Brown in 2016. He is one of the best guards in the entire league, and he's, maybe 25, 26, maybe a little bit older. But then you move on a little bit, Jason Tatum the year after that, Luka the year after that, Zion the year after that, Anthony Edwards the year after that. So all of these draft classes, we haven't really seen too many, like you said, a lot of busts. I would personally put James Wiseman in that category right now, just because if his career ended today, I think he would be the biggest bust in league history. But, I mean, even after that Anthony Edwards class, you have guys like Cade Cunningham, Evan Mobley, Scotty Barnes, and then Paulo Banchero this year already is showing out and having a potential all-star season. So I definitely agree that the league has definitely gotten younger, and most of the reason they've done that is because those are the best players in the league.
Yeah. One thing I do want to point out, because I know this kind of builds into your point you're going to talk about after, but I know a lot of people talk about just how the rules of the league are different and the officiating of the game. You know, I remember I was watching a video a while back that went into a lot of detail on how, like, travels aren't called as much, and, like, when people are ball handling, they have more freedom to carry. And I think, you know, that's the thing that's been talked about. And, you know, even you just look at some of the rule changes that the league has made with, like, the defensive 3-second, like back in the early 2000s, and other changes like that, like hand checking, you know, they really promote offense. So I want to say, do you think that that has kind of helped players get better? Or do you think that that's just kind of even without that, and if we still had, like, some of those rules that we had back in the 90s or 80s, we'd still see this boom of young talent?
Well, I think they've definitely benefited from it, but, I mean, you look at some of these top guys, like Zion would have been elite in pretty much any generation. Jason Tatum would have been elite in any era. Luka, especially, because he can do everything.
Yeah.
And, I mean, people were criticizing him for being a slow player in today's game. Think about putting him back in, like, the 80s, where it was pretty much everything was a half-court set, and he could just pick apart defenses. So a lot of these top-tier young players are not kind of the Trae Youngs of the world, where people would say, oh, yeah, he's good now, but you stick him back 20 years ago and he's nothing. Most of these guys that are in the top 5 would dominate or still be just as good in really any era, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely think that the rules, you know, they've definitely benefited offense, but I think, you know, the league as a whole, you're just seeing players who are more complete, and even these younger guys are just a reflection of, you know, the way that the league is going. So if we see this league kind of become, as you talked about, people say it's a grown man's league, I'm kind of in favor of it being a league where, you know, the younger guys are really the ones who, you know, are the ones leading the way. But time will tell how that happens. But do you want to lead into your second point? Or?
I wanted to quick bring up that we are, around like 27 games in to the league right now, which is a good chunk of the season. And there are still 6 players above 30 points per game. That is pretty much unheard of as far as I understand in NBA history. And I remember watching a video about, I mean, it's gotten pretty egregious, the carries and travels around the league. And I don't know if it necessarily, like, I don't know how much it needs to be added or removed, but I could very well see it attributing towards higher scoring like we're seeing this season.
Yeah. It's funny you guys talk about travels, because just a couple of games ago in Cleveland, I think I saw a game where there was like 12 combined travel calls, which comparative to the rest of the league and the rest of the season, watching that game is just bizarre to watch, because, I mean, just routine drives to the rim or like starts of a possession and the whistle's getting blown right away for a travel. It was so like jarring to watch and compare to some of the other games.
I'm almost wondering if they're starting to kind of crack down on that, because you brought that up, and I remember in that Mavs-Warriors game a few weeks ago, they called like 10 travels that game, and I remember on one of like the final plays, they called a travel on Curry. So I'm starting to wonder if almost the league has realized, like, we're letting too much slide, and now they're cracking down.
And one last question before we move on: Do you guys think the game has become more entertaining with a little bit more leniency on travels, kind of adding more flashiness into people's dribble moves and just the skill and bag people can have.
I'd definitely say so. Like, I'm going to be honest. If they called like every carry, every travel, I don't think you would see guys like Kyrie doing what they're doing. Or even, like, I know Jordan Poole, because like his move where he kind of like does a dead leg move and then he'll like step back. Like that move, every time I see that, I'm like, if this were like an earlier era, that would be called a carry every time. But I think too, having that, just allowing the guys to have that freedom, it really does make the game more entertaining. And I think at the end of the day, I hate to say it, but the NBA is a product.
And a business.
Yeah. So it's a thing that like you just got to sell to your fans. So.
And James Harden kind of, I would say, almost started off this kind of era of leniency and dribble calls because everyone knows his signature like double step back.
Yeah.
That isn't called the travel. And they've done plenty of investigations into it. They don't consider it a travel, so it would be kind of dumb of them to change back to an older form when one of the league's best players for the last 6 or 7 years has benefited off of the new calls.
Yeah.
But speaking of calls, doing a little bit of research today just for fun, I want to get into all the people complaining about all the fouls that are called in the league nowadays and how soft the league is. I was doing a little bit of research, and guys, please combat my points here if you disagree or find a fallacy in what I found. But looking at the free throw or the field goal attempts per game in all of the different seasons in the NBA, I found all this data on Basketball Reference. The 2021-22 season, which is last year, ranked 41st in all of the NBA seasons. I believe there was 77 that they compiled on the list. That means 40 past seasons of all the years are ahead of last season in amounts of field goal attempts in games. So you take that, and then you look at the free throw attempts per game, which obviously free throws come from shooting fouls, right? The 2021-22 season last year was 75th most. That's also known as third least in all of the seasons. So just last year, there was like almost the least amount of free throw attempts per game in the entire history of the NBA. That only trails the 2020-2021 season and the 17-18 season, which
is
are modern day
basketball.
Yeah.
Which is very interesting. I would have never thought.
Yeah, and you look at some of the heyday type of seasons, like the 1990-91 season, 37th most. 92-93 was 39th most. 94-95, 41st. And then you look at 95-96, where kind of the height of that 90s Bulls team was taking place. 46th out of the 77 seasons logged on Basketball Reference. So it's kind of wild that people still complain about how many free throws and how soft the league has gotten when the data just really doesn't support that when you compare it to the leagues and the eras really that people say we need to go back to.
Yeah, I think this does kind of speak a little bit to, I guess, kind of the hypocrisy. Because, like, you go back to, like, those 90s that you talked about when there were more defensive eras and stuff. And, like, people are always saying, like, man, I want more games that have better defense or more fouls are called. But then we get games like that. And then you'll go on Twitter and people will be like, oh, this is such a boring game. So I think, too, that, like, it also just shows how far, like, the league really has, how much the league really has changed and just how much faster of a game it's become. Because if you look at, hold on.
Ooh, I thought of an interesting thing to add on to that, though. Do you think this could have came because they're, well, oh, wait, you were talking about the field goal attempt being around the, like, basically, like, the average for the entire, like, history of the NBA versus, because I was going to bring up the counterpoint of three-point attempts and how that might kind of cloud the foul calling just because obviously fouls are called way, way less on three-point attempts.
Yeah, but I mean, you look at the field goal attempts per game. Last year was around middle of the pack in terms of the number. There was around 77 seasons logged on Basketball Reference. They're sitting in the low 40s, so that's almost a middle point between them. So even with those three-point shots added in, it's not like the field goal attempts per game was way up and like the most in the season, like, or in the history of the league. It's more that middle of the pack. So I personally don't think that inputs too much into the data. It would be different if last year it was like, oh, wow, that was like the 10th most all time in shots per game in the entire history. They were like still around the middle of the pack. But then lastly, you look at free throws per field goal attempt, which basically shows, when players take a shot, how often are they going to draw a foul? You look at the 95-96 season as well, 38th most in a season in NBA history, whereas last year was the 4th least. So, people continue to complain about how soft the league has gotten, how easy it is for players to go to the line. I know a couple of years ago, people saying Jordan would average 50 a game, saying, oh, he already got so many fouls in his era. Now think of how soft this league is and how much he would get fouls in the modern day. Last year was 4th least of all time. So players really aren't drawing as many fouls as people think.
Yeah.
And I would also like to bring up the best players in basketball know how to draw fouls.
Mm-hmm.
I think, too, all this really goes to show is just the league is just so different. But I also think that, I think sometimes, a lot of times people will, I kind of feel like people get stuck in their nostalgia and how they felt about like the 90s and the 80s. They'll kind of use that as like the golden age standard.
Mm-hmm.
And then they'll compare it today and just without even having the facts or like really, I feel like looking into it, just kind of say like what's going on now is just completely trash compared to, how it used to be. And I think this is just a good example that, that's not really the case.
And I was one of those people before I looked at some of these numbers. Like, the message we get from virtually all the media is that back in the day, players would drive down the lane and get knocked out Mike Tyson style, and they'd get no foul.
Mm-hmm.
But, the data that I notice, at least, and I may be looking at this wrong, I'm not a math major, but the data just really doesn't support that as much as people would think. You would think back in the 90s and the 80s, the free throw attempts would be way down. But the data actually shows it's way more up than any of these modern seasons, which is kind of insane to me.
Now for our player we want to highlight for welcome to the league. We kind of could have probably talked about him a little bit earlier, but we still just want to give him his flowers. And that guy is Andrew Nembhard, who played at Gonzaga last year and was a second-round pick, but he made some big splashes in the league these past few weeks. In that game against the Lakers it was like 2 Thursdays ago, I want to say. He had a game winner off of a Pacers big comeback run when they were down huge. And then he had 31 points versus the Warriors. And I remember even Stephen Curry gave him kind of a look after he hit a kind of a clutch 3, like, is this man serious? But since then, he has kind of cooled off. 7 points on Wednesday, 3 on Friday, and then 5 yesterday. But I think what that little run showed that he can be a part of what this Pacers group is cooking, because they have a really good young core with Ben Mathurin, Tyrese Halliburton. And I think that Andrew Nembhard could be a good backup piece to what they've got.
Yeah, and we've talked a lot about this Pacers team surprisingly this year with Ben Mathurin and some of the other young players that they had. I didn't come into this season expecting to feature them so much, but the Pacers might have a little bit of something cooking right now. Yeah. Their future is looking pretty bright, and if they can kind of ride the wave and all the momentum they've built up, they're currently sitting 6th in the playoff standings in the Eastern Conference. So I feel like they're still riding a little bit under the radar. People are still kind of looking at this Pacers team as, one of these kind of mid teams that are struggling to figure out if they should really tank or if they're actually good. But, they're sitting barely over 500. But, if Andrew Nembhard figures it out again, I know recently he's slowed down a little bit. But if he gets it going again, don't be surprised if the Pacers kind of climb up the rankings a little bit.
With the youth of the Pacers, how do you guys see their future? Do you guys think they have potential to really take off with their young, I don't know if I want to say stars yet, but rising stars.
I want to say, I think the Pacers are doing, they're doing the right thing right now. And they have, not in the sense that they're necessarily winning, that's a nice plus, but they're getting their young guys a lot of minutes, getting them out on the floor and, really just letting them get experience. And then you add that to the fact that they're actually winning games while still getting better. I mean, that definitely looks like a recipe for
future success?
Yeah, a lot of future success. And who knows, in this, even if they fall off after this point or, they don't get that high of a draft pick, mid-lottery, you can still find good draft pieces that can help your team. So
And I'm glad you talk about draft pieces because don't look now, but the Pacers currently have the 30th, 17th, and But the Pacers currently have the 17th, 26th, and 30th pick in the first round of this current upcoming NBA draft. So I don't think they're going to take all of those picks, obviously, because you can only develop so many guys. And I don't think in this year's draft this late you would want to take all three of those picks. So don't be surprised if next season or I guess this offseason, if there's some guys that are routinely in that trade kind of market, don't be surprised if Indiana maybe goes all in on one of these big name players to add to that backcourt of, Ben Mathurin, Tyrese Halliburton. We'll see if some of the big, I think DeAndre Ayton was one of the players they were going after this past year.
They actually had him signed until the Suns matched his.
Yeah.
offer.
So, we know they value those bigs and they want to bring in like a high level center. So, we'll see what names later on this season are up for grabs. And don't be surprised if the Pacers are that team with that best offer. Because, 3 first-round picks this year that they're able to offer is crazy.
And we've seen in these past trades with Rudy Gobert, even that Kawhi PG trade, people really value those first-round picks. So they definitely can make a blockbuster trade this summer. Now we're going to highlight some prospect performances. And we've got Cam Whitmore, who had 19 points, 7 rebounds off the bench versus Boston College just yesterday, and I think this was his 3rd game back. He shot 3 for 6 from three-point range, and I know a lot of scouts had questions about his three-point shooting, but if he keeps shooting like that regularly, I think that makes him even more dangerous than he already is.
Yeah, we saw him in his first game back, still kind of slow in terms of production, but now, game after game, he's starting to build back up. And we talked a little bit about how Brandon Miller last week could slip down a little bit as some of these other preseason top 5 guys get back up there. And right now, Nick Smith and Cam Whitmore especially starting to climb back up there into the top 5.
Yeah, Brandon Miller shot 0 for 8 versus Houston. That is one of the best defenses in college basketball, but performances like that you hope not to see. But one positive, I know I'm bringing it up just because we talked about it on his breakdown, but he shot 8 for 9 from the free throw line. So he's shown that he can be a really dangerous free throw shooter when the time matters. And if he can get to the line, that'll bode really well for him. Nick Smith also had another good performance versus Oklahoma. He had 21 points on 50% shooting. And I was watching a little bit of that game, and he really just showed how much of a threat he can be from the mid-range area. He was hitting a lot of floaters, getting downhill. He also just showed that he has good basketball IQ. He got a lot of backdoor cuts, and he was really just slicing apart that Oklahoma defense.
And I do want to ask you guys, based on his first couple performances, does he look like that pick 3 or 4 guy as he was first projected coming into Arkansas?
I would still like to see a little more games from him, but I definitely think he has the potential to. He hasn't really shot as well from the three-point line as I was hoping he would. I think right now he's shooting like 30%. He's been 1 for 5 his last 2 games, I know. But he looks like when he gets hot, he's just somebody who can really take teams out of games and just help Arkansas go on runs. But I think he definitely could.
Yeah, and you compare just the per-game numbers to the top guard in this draft in Scoot Henderson. Nick Smith is still coming back from that injury. He's still got some time to put himself out there, but Scoot Henderson's averaging over 21 points, and he's averaging 6 assists per game in the G League Ignite. And he actually almost averages 2 steals a game as well, which is something that Nick Smith hasn't really brought to the court that much in terms of defensive prowess. So Nick Smith, obviously still a really good prospect, but Scoot still got that big edge over the Arkansas guard.
And I would like to say, with how close this, I would say, prospect race is, in that like 3 all the way to like 9 range, you could probably say it's like a 3 to 9 range of just like all those players competing for the higher spots up in the draft. Would you guys say that? Well, I guess depends on their performances through the season. There's a pretty good chance this could all come down to how they do in March Madness.
I think.
And who rises up.
I think because you even look back to last year, I think if Paulo hadn't done as well as he did in the tournament and got Duke to the Final Four, I don't think he would have been that first pick. But I think, too, like you said, it's another tight race. Last year, really that 1 through 3, it was kind of changing every week who was going to go number 1. And I think it's kind of similar after that second spot, you know. But I think just really now, because we're getting into a lot of the conference matchups too, it's going to play a big part in where these guys go in the spots.
And I'm just looking back because, I mean, we talked about the difference between Nick Smith and Scoot Henderson. You look back a couple of the recent drafts at guys that averaged 20 per game coming into the draft. Keegan Murray last year was the only guy in the entire top 6 that was over 20 points per game. He had 23.5, and he didn't even go 1 or 2. He was number 4. You look the year right before that with Cade Cunningham, Jalen Green, but Cade was the only guy over 20 points per game in that kind of top-tier prospects. Nobody in the 2020 draft was able to do it in the top 5. Then you have to go all the way back to the Zion and Ja. We keep bringing them up this week. Zion was at 22.5. Ja was at 24.5. And you look at those guys now, elite players in the league. You look at this year's draft with Victor and Scoot. Both of those guys are sitting well above 20 points per game. So if that pattern continues, we might be seeing 2 elite level players coming right into the league this year.
And now we will be moving on to our prospect breakdown, where we wanted to do this a few weeks ago, but the camera's quite literally turned off. But Keyonte George for Baylor, it is your time. Once again, 19 years old right now, and will be about 19 and a half when he's drafted. He hails from Louisville, Texas, and plays for the Baylor Bears of the Big 12 Conference, 6'4" and 185 pounds. But he might be one of the more skilled players in this draft. He's averaging 15.7 points a game, 4 assists, 4 rebounds. He scores at all 3 levels, and he's shown that he has a really good basketball IQ with just the way he playmakes for his teammates.
Yeah, and he has, I mean, one of the deepest bags in this entire draft class. He's, like you said, super skilled, really good at putting the ball through the rim when he's on his game. But his biggest weakness so far has been his field goal percentage. I mean, he's sitting under 40% from the year. But when you look at his highlights, they're some of the most impressive in the draft. I would really just like to see him kind of put those easy ones in like we know he can. I mean, that's the reason why he was a 5-star recruit coming out of high school. He was one of the best guards in the entire nation, arguably the best. But so far at Baylor, we've seen him be a little bit challenged at times against some of the higher level teams.
Yeah. He's ever since that UCLA game, he's only played Gonzaga in terms of like top level, but it seems like he's slowly I remember before in our breakdown I talked about him just kind of finding his groove through the season, and like I think he's kind of starting to find his spot and know his role. So I think I'm really interested to see how that percentage looks when we get into some of the Big 12 play, which is arguably one of the toughest basketball conferences. And also, too, another thing, I think, we look at his shooting percentage and how much he shoots, but I think another thing, too, is, like, he's a guard, so we can't get, like, too caught up in... I think definitely percentage is an important thing to look at, but guards, especially in college, when they have a lot of freedom that he has, it's going to be tough for him to have extremely efficient games when you just look at the type of player he is. But I think that he's talented enough where he can figure it out and it won't be too big of an issue for him going forward.
Yeah, the month of December has not been kind to Keyonte George. 6 for 15 from the field versus Gonzaga, 6 for 15 versus Tarleton State. So kind of a mix between top-tier college teams and a team that's brand new to D1. And the efficiency really didn't change at all. But one of the things to look at with Keyonte is he is not afraid to let that ball fly. I mean, he's averaging over 6 3-point attempts per game. He's had 2 games already this year with he's 11 attempts from downtown. So it seems like he's got that intangible confidence and drive to be the team's leading scorer, which could be beneficial to him in the NBA, especially if he's put on a team where they need that go-to scorer.
Yeah, you talked a little bit about his intangibles, but he's also, I know watching a few of his games, I just remember him bringing energy on both sides of the ball and defense. Like, he was a player who was going after 50-50 balls. He was, clapping in people's faces. I mean, Keyonte is a guy who, like, even outside of the stats, I feel like he just brings a good mentality and mindset just from the little games that I've seen. And, I don't want to compare him to Scoot, but, like, I remember when the game we watched before his breakdown, he was kind of doing a lot of those same things, and that helped them go on a run. And we haven't really seen it from Keyonte yet, but I want to see a performance like that where, they're kind of down and, like, he does something to give them a little bit of energy and they go, on a 10-0 run and make a insane comeback, or like him just even getting the hot hand and heat checking, because I feel like he's a player who's got that potential.
He's almost got a little bit of Russell Westbrook in him. Like, he likes to control the whole game. He's a really good rebounder. I mean, he's had multiple games this year with 5 or 6 or 7 rebounds. So I could see that number jumping up eventually at the next level. He's a pretty decent facilitator. I mean, he's got 2 games this year with 7 assists, a couple with 6. That could also jump up in more minutes as well. And obviously, he's a volumes shooter. So he has potential, if he is a boom prospect and not a bust, to be almost like a franchise-level, team-changing player just because of his way of impacting 3 different huge stat categories.
Yeah. And even if he's not like some guy who's like a franchise-changing player, I think that what we talked about, the intangibles, but just the fact that he's a guy who can score on his own, get his own bucket, and make that read to the, to the open player, I think too, having that just makes him dangerous.
And we can't give the positive of free throw percentage to Brandon Miller without giving it to Keyonte George as well. He's perfect from the line in the month of December. He's 10 for 10, and on the season he's averaging just around 86% from the free throw line, which is an elite number in college basketball. So that bodes well for his shooting numbers going forward. 40% from the field isn't great. 33% from the three-point line isn't great either. But if he can kind of turn it around, maybe get some better shot selection as well, those numbers could jump up. And with that, I would assume his points per game will go up as well.
There are a lot of guards at the top of this draft. How does he stack up as a guard against these other guys when teams are looking for their guy at the backcourt position? And, like, how does he compare to other players in this draft?
I would say, just off the dome, I would say between Scoot and Nick. Scoot, he doesn't have that same. I feel like they kind of have similar archetypes in a way, but I feel like Keyonte's more scoring minded, and he doesn't have the same bounce or twitchiness that I would say Scoot has. And with Nick, I feel like he has more size, so I feel like he's just able to be a little bit more versatile in the sense of the positions that he plays and, what he kind of works with in the offense.
Apparently on Tankathon, Nick Smith doesn't actually have too much size on him. He has about an inch, and we'll see. They're about the same weight, but I know coming into the season, it was thought that Nick Smith was like 6'7". So, we'll get that official measurement at the Combine coming up. But like you said, I think Nick Smith is currently sitting a little bit better, even after coming off that injury. And another guard that I didn't feel too highly on coming into this season that has been pretty efficient and successful at Kentucky is Cason Wallace. I thought Keyonte George for sure would go ahead of Cason Wallace, who's a freshman as well. But so far this year, he's over 50% from the field and from three. So, that efficiency, I know GMs value different things. We'll see if they value the volume scoring option or a guy that kind of like Keegan Murray will be very efficient from the field.
Yeah. I think, too, Cason Wallace, he's a really good defensive guy, and he's just kind of all over the floor. What he provides is energy. But I think what edges Keyonte a little bit over is just the fact that he probably has a higher floor. And I think another thing with Keyonte that's different from some of these other guards is that I feel like a lot of why he's projected so high is just because he has such a high potential. I feel like, and some of these other guys, like I feel like Nick Smith, he has a high floor as well, or he has a high ceiling, I mean, but I feel like his floor is just a little bit higher. And even with Scoot, like just the things they can already do. Because we talked about Keontae's percentage, and I think that kind of shows like he's just not really figured everything out yet.
Yeah, and like you said about ceilings and floors, I feel like if a GM is thinking forward, which guy will give us a better chance in the playoffs if they hit, you would imagine that Keyonte George would be a way better option than Cason Wallace. Because, like you said, Cason Wallace to me is kind of like this year's Dyson Daniels, where, yeah, they're super efficient. They can rebound, pass, defend, score a little bit, but he's not really that volume shooter that you need in a playoff scenario where you need a guy to go get you 40 in a tough matchup like someone like a Donovan Mitchell could do. Whereas I feel like Keyonte George, he would go out there in a high-pressure scenario, and he wouldn't let it phase him. He would go out there, put up 15, 20, even 25 shots, give you maybe 35, 40 points, and win you a game in the playoffs.
Now that we've talked about all that, let's talk about fit. We got a lot of teams in this lottery and a lot of teams that could potentially see the opportunity to take Keyonte George. What teams would you guys like to see him with, and what teams do you guys think he would fit perfectly with?
Jake, I'm going to let you go first on that one.
Okay. Well, the one team I really don't want to see him go to is Houston, just because I feel like adding Keyonte George to a roster with Kevin Porter and Jalen Green, those are already two super high field goal attempt guys, especially Jalen Green, or at least that's what you want him to be going into kind of 4 or 5 years down the line. So I don't want to add too many shots in the backcourt for Houston, but the team that I really would like to see him go to is the San Antonio Spurs. They just lost DeJounte Murray this season through a trade, who was kind of a do-it-all guy. Obviously, he could still score the ball at a really high level, but we didn't really see this Spurs team in a long time have kind of like a shot-first point guard and kind of an offensive generator. Obviously, Tony Parker, one of the best point guards, probably the best point guard in San Antonio history. DeJounte Murray, a former All-Star for them, but I think Keyonte George could lead this Spurs team into a new era with some of their other young players as well.
Yeah. I think the Spurs you mentioned is a good fit, but I feel like somebody that I would like to see Keyonte play alongside is I'd like to see him paired up with LaMelo at Charlotte, just because I feel like they're in a position where they've got to rebuild. But I think him having another scorer like Keyonte, and that would also give him more time to develop because, he'd have more freedom there. And so I think him just finding his game, that would be a really good situation for him. And I think playing alongside LaMelo, he's a smart player. He likes to get out in transition. And I think, too, that would just be fun for him. And I just like the energy that they would bring on the floor. So I think I'd really like to see him up in Charlotte.
So do you guys kind of like the idea of maybe Charlotte taking Keyonte and then, either signing or maybe trading for a big man and having that like a core, a really solid team, I feel like, going into the future years?
I mean, Charlotte they have Mark Williams, I believe, and I think he's got the potential to be a really good defensive big. So even say if they don't trade, but like over time, I think that could be. It might not be necessarily a championship winning group, but I think that it would still be a kind of a fun team to watch, and they definitely be in that playoff spot every year.
If not a starter, I feel like Mark Williams would definitely be a great rotational piece as well.
Definitely, yeah.
And then you got Bryce McGowan's on that squad.
Oh, yeah.
Nebraska.
He had a pretty decent game recently.
He's been actually I saw a quote where the coach was really high on his development. So I think him, they probably expected him to be in the G League now, but we said on this podcast he could have been a first round pick. So
there's just something so weird about seeing Bryce and like watching him for a whole season as a Nebraska fan and going to this school, and then watching him absolutely send a Kawhi Leonard layup into the third row. Like, dude absolutely blocked the hell out of a shot from him. And he's just a natural. He looks, the coach quote fits exactly how I see him when he plays out there, is he just plays like he's been there for years. But I
think one other team that Keyonte could fit on, and I'm not sure if this team will be even in the position later on in this season, but I think the Miami Heat could be a decent fit, just because with Kyle Lowry kind of moving out of the league eventually, maybe the next 3 or 4 years, we'll see. They're already such an elite defensive team with Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo and some of these other guys. So I feel like adding in a Keyonte George who could throw up 15 shots and add to that offense with Jimmy and Bam who can do it all, that could be a pretty good fit and be a pretty solid big three for the next 5 or 6 years.
I think, too, you kind of hinted at it a little, but he could come in and even kind of like we saw Tyler Hero in 2020 and in the bubble, he could be a guy who comes in and makes an impact right away if that situation somehow were to happen. And, Keyonte, I think we talked about it, he's got the potential to be a guy who can get hot and go on big runs at any moment, when he really finds his stride. And I think they need more bench production, just looking at where they're at this year and assuming they don't make any big moves over the offseason. So I think that having Keyonte that'd be a fun fit.
And the Heat definitely obviously have potential to move much farther down the draft and not even have a chance to get Keyonte on their roster. They're currently 12-15 on the day of us recording this episode, but there's a lot of teams right around there in that 15 range that are barely over 500. So don't be surprised if Miami moves up a bit, but if they deal with an injury this year or fall down, Keyonte George could be a seamless fit for the Heat.
And this is kind of off topic, but it's still so wild to me that because of the Lakers trade, the absolutely thriving Pelicans right now could just pick up an absolute.
They could pick up a Victor Wembanyama.
Tankathon has them projected to get Cam Whitmore right now. I think Cam Whitmore is probably going to be the 4th or 5th pick. But getting a player like him, just his first few games that he's looked like a scary player. So if really, this is going to be like another Warriors situation where they're, a really contending team, but they go and add another lottery level talent
that hopefully doesn't get hurt every year.
It's literally taking an MVP caliber stretch from Anthony Davis over the past month to get the Lakers to the 6th overall pick in the draft that would go to the Pelicans.
The Lakers have been, at least before, they were a little bit hot, but I just don't
understand. I don't know.
Years past have shown that AD's more than likely going to get hurt midway through the season. That's just his track record. I don't want to put that out there, but it's hard for him to have a season where he's fully healthy. And LeBron, he's getting older. He hasn't really fallen off, but he's definitely had to rest a little bit more, and he's had issues that have bothered him. So it's interesting to see if they'll be able to keep this little success they've been having afloat. But like Jake said, they could easily have something go wrong, and if they ended up in that 1, 2, or 3 spot, oh my God. But
man, Pelicans fans, y'all got negativity this week, and y'all are up huge right now because you got Brandon Ingram, absolute menace mode right now. Zion Williamson just going ham on the league. And now potential to pick up one of the best players in this draft. And this, as we've talked about, could be one of the greatest drafts the league has seen in a very long time.
And speaking of the Pelicans in the draft and Zion, when they got Zion, they rose 6 spots in the lottery, in the lottery like selection. The Grizzlies rose up 6 spots to get that number 2 pick to get Ja. The Hawks that got that pick through the Lakers trade rose up 7 spots to get to that number 4 pick. So we've seen in the recent years that even if this Lakers team somehow puts together a decent season, get to that 8th or 9th best odds, decent for what they've been doing. But if they get up to that 8th or 9th spot, don't count out the Pelicans yet, because even if they don't get that number 1 pick to get Wemby, they could still rise up 6 or 7 spots and go get themselves a Nick Smith or a Thompson twin, who for the Pelicans would probably be coming off the bench, because CJ and Brandon Ingram are going to be very difficult to kind of replace in the starting lineup as a rookie. So this Pelicans team might have the brightest future in the entire NBA.
I'm praying for storylines and narrative purposes that somehow we get Victor to either the Magic or the Pelicans. Yes. I need that storyline.
Magic Victor would go hard.
Just because Paulo and Victor, that's a crazy.
Hey, look. Call me crazy. Bulls Victor would go crazy.
Bulls Victor?
Bulls don't even have their first round pick right now. They got to go into the Magic.
They do, yeah.
So RIP to your dreams, Brody.
Hey, if you send the lottery here on Tankathon, though, they still can bag it.
Right now they do have the Blazers pick, but the Blazers are...
I mean, they'd have to keep sucking for a bit.
They would have to rise up a lot.
The Blazers, they've been doing pretty good.
Hey, look, man, the lottery sims, they still got a shot.
Yeah, I mean, that pick for the Bulls is protected 1 through 4 for the Magic.
Okay.
So I believe if they get into the top 4, it will go to the Bulls, but that's a big jump for them to get up there, especially if they start competing and get up maybe toward that 12 or 13 spot. That's going to be really tough with the odds.
As long as Victor doesn't go to the Jazz, I'll be very happy.
All right, but that's probably going to wrap it up here on the Keyonte George prospect breakdown. Both of us, Brandon and I, and even Brody, pretty high on his potential. A very volume scoring player, but we'll just have to see if he can continue it later on into this college season.
Brody, let's get into trivia, bro. Let's get into trivia.
All right, it's trivia time.
I need a win.
Brandon, even when, you've won when the cameras were off. You guys tied last week. This week we have 3 questions, and by true or false answers this week. So it'll be pretty interesting. It's either going to make it way easier or just more confusing. We'll kind of see how it goes. But I got some interesting things, some fun facts. Let's get it going. For the first question here, and this is true or false. And this can be any part of the question. It can be a part of the question. It can be the whole question. Or it can be a part of the statement that's false. It can be the whole statement's false. Or it can be the whole statement's true. So the average draft position for the Rookie of the Year is roughly 2.8. True or false?
I'm going to guess true.
I'm going to say false. I feel like it's probably higher than that mostly.
Okay. And the answer is false, 4.4.
Wow.
So what is
the Rookie of the Year average draft position is actually 4.4, which I was very surprised by. 4.4 seems pretty low to me, but because that means you're going all the way down to pick 10s and stuff.
Yeah.
And pick 8
interesting.
to pull that down. Because Paulo right now, he's a first overall pick.
You got Kyrie Irving. He was Rookie of the Year. Ben Simmons was Rookie of the Year.
Who was Rookie of the Year last year? I'm it was Scotty Barnes.
Yeah, he was 4 or 5, I think.
Yeah, that's the lowest pick I can remember is he didn't even win. He lost to Ben Simmons. But it was Donovan Mitchell. and he was like 12 or something.
I guess I could see like maybe like a super low first rounder shooting out of nowhere and absolutely tanking that number just because he's all the way down to like 20 something. But it's a very interesting stat. Here we go again. The Cleveland Cavaliers have had the first overall pick 6 times. True or false?
That's false.
I mean, wait. Let me think about this. Yeah, that's definitely false. But he got it first.
And the answer is...
That might actually be true. It might be up to 6.
True.
Wow, I'm a fake fan for real.
So, it's a 2016 stat, so I had to double check because I was worried.
No, they haven't had it.
But from everything I've seen from there, it is 6. So you guys both got that wrong.
So they had LeBron,
Kyrie.
Doherty was number 1 pick, and I also think Lenny Wilkens maybe?
Wiggins.
And oh my gosh.
Wiggins in
I
2014.
completely forgot about Wiggins.
because he didn't even play with them. So to me, it's like
Didn't he get picked and then he got traded immediately,
traded,
right?
Pretty
got
much
traded
like
to
the
the
next
Wolves,
month. Yeah.
That's wild.
That's how I got mixed up. I was like,
Were you excited for Wiggins too?
I was more excited for the big 3 with Love.
I remember I really was because I was a big KU fan, and like they were promoting him as like the next big. They were literally calling
The
him
next LeBron or whatever.
They were calling him Air Canada, bro. Like they weren't even
Air
calling
Canada.
him LeBron. They were legit calling him Jordan. So it was, but then they traded him. And
Wow, I'm a fake fan. I forgot about
All right.
Wiggins. I can't believe that.
Brandon has the chance to tie it, and I also have a tie-breaking question. So if Brandon can bag this. All right. Until 2016, at least one son of a former NBA player was taken in 13 consecutive drafts. True or false?
I'm gonna say true.
I got to go false just so I can at least tie Brandon.
And the answer is true.
Yeah.
Wow.
Brandon ties it. I got confused at first because I completely missed the very first question of this line. So I just did the last 3 here. I still have one question for you guys. So we'll have one for the tiebreaker.
Nah,
But
Brandon's up 2-0 on me.
That was an interesting stat, but it doesn't necessarily surprise me. There's a lot of juniors in there. There's a lot of players with the last names of very prestigious and legendary players that played way back in the day. I mean, I guess it kind of makes sense once you've been up in the NBA. You know what the expectations are. If your, son wants to get to that level, you can kind of teach them and train them in the way,
I feel like too.
just how far you have to go.
They also probably just get looked at more by scouts.
That's also, look at Bronny.
Yeah.
Do you think Bronny's getting looked at like he is right now? Is he even that high? Is he even in the 40s?
That's a tough question. I think Bronny is a legit player, but
I'm not discrediting his play, but I'm just saying
I don't know if he'd be
his name.
It's interesting. That's just hard to answer because it's
I feel like the media attention at least would be down because most of the time, if you're not a famous player in high school, you have to be like a top 5 player to even get put on YouTube. But his game is pretty solid. I mean, he's an elite 3-point shooter in high school, pretty solid athlete, but a lot of that stuff is carried over from the rest of the top 40.
And he still played at Sierra Canyon, which is they're not the most prestigious basketball school ever, but that's still a good high school to go to.
Absolute bounce to poster people. He's got plenty of videos behind that. All right. One more here.
I'm up 2-1, aren't I?
I think 2-0. I didn't get one right this week.
You did? I thought you got the...
It's tied 1-1.
Really?
I said false for Cleveland.
Oh, yeah, because we both got that.
But you guys both got that wrong.
Yeah, and then
There's
Brandon
one-
got the one after.
Yeah, and
I
he
haven't
got the
gotten
first one.
Yeah, so he's up 2-0.
Huh?
I'm 2
No, it's 1-1.
1-1.
Wait, no.
I haven't gotten a single
Jake,
one right.
you got that first one right.
No, I got the first
Brandon got it right.
Did you say false or true?
I said false.
I haven't gotten one right. I know that for sure.
Bro, run the tapes back. I want my W. Actually, we can do this. We can do another question, but since I'm bold, we can do all on the table. If
Brandon, you haven't won.
I don't care, bro. I want smoke. If I If I get it wrong, he gets all my points and he gets the W for the week.
All right.
I'm feeling that type of energy.
Here we go then. True or false? The first ever number 1 overall pick never played an NBA game.
True.
It's got to be true.
Well, since he is leading by 2-0, it is true.
Yeah.
But Branden just outright wins that.
Yeah.
That's a sweep. That's a 3.
Let's
I mean,
go.
I figured you guys would get that question just because it's so specific. But,
Yeah.
Uh,
That would have been funny if you just tricked both of us. And it's like, no, obviously he played a game.
Bro, now he's gonna.
no, the Pittsburgh Ironmen selected Clifton McNeely out of Texas Wesleyan University.
I feel like too, you just kind of hear stories kind of like that back from those earlier drafts where like, because I
Yeah.
remember there was like a girl who got drafted in like the 70s, or a woman who got drafted in the 70s, and she never played like a real game.
He, yeah. And so the reason, if you guys would like context behind why this man didn't play, bro got drafted for World War II. He got drafted into World War II. And
He was drafted twice.
he got drafted twice. That's kind of crazy. Highly touted prospect right there.
Versatile player.
And bro just decided to coach after serving. So
That sucks.
Kudos to him.
I mean, the NBA probably wasn't nearly as
sophisticated.
it is now.
I mean, it's, yeah.
but like that still sucks that bro got.
Number 1 overall pick. I don't know if the expectations are as high back in that day, but like,
Imagine
you are the first person to ever get drafted first overall. That is a historic thing in a league that probably wasn't even viewed as relevant. But yeah, bro just decided, nah, I'm gonna be a coach, you know, after the war. And yeah, that does it. Branden gets his first win in, I want to say, 6 weeks straight.
Let's go.
Well, however long it is, thank you all for tuning in to League Bound this week. Really fun episode for us to put together for you. Make sure you follow us on social media. You can follow me at Jacob Schrantz on Instagram and Twitter.
You can follow me at Branden_Blue25 on Twitter and Branden.Blue on Instagram.
At Broderick Wilken on Twitter. And if you need anything else, all of our links are in the description. You can find us on YouTube just under League Bound, and you can find us on Spotify under League Bound as well. You can listen to all of our podcasts on Spotify. So if you're in the car, you know, you can't be looking at your phone, you know, no texting and driving, guys. Drive safe, please, for the love of God. Yeah, just throw us up on Spotify. Easily the least amount of traffic on that for us, but we'd love to have you over there too. Weekly polls. I ask questions for you guys to answer every week. It's fun to read and hear your guys' opinions on stuff in comparison to ours and all that. But other than that, I think that's a wrap. I think we're hitting around an hour for this podcast. Good numbers on the podcast. I think we had a great one here, and excited for the next. It will be online, or it will be probably through
Zoom.
a call, a Zoom, Discord, however we decide to do it. So production quality might be down just a slight bit, but outside of that, excited to get going with this sucker.
Yeah, make sure you guys subscribe as well. We're trying to push for 400 subs by the end of this holiday break that we're going on. That would be great. So make sure you all do that. And thanks for tuning in.
See ya.
See you guys when we see you guys. LeBron.
It's always... I'm leaving that in.